Okay, thanks everybody, thanks for coming, and thanks for having the discussion before the talk. It's taken all my nerves away completely. I'd called this talk Vibrating Information. I want to talk about vibrations, I want to talk about information, but I want to talk about a lot of things in between. But I thought first I would show you the artist's statement that I put forward to a gallery in Manchester called Home, just to show why I think it's appropriate that this sort of discussion happens at ANPA. I said there's just one universe out there, but it has many faces. Some of them are as yet totally beyond our senses or our knowledge. The fun is wearing different spectacles to examine those faces. Evolution has divided our human experience into different senses, and we've developed consequent disciplines, art, science, music, etc., and narrower definitions of specialisms within those, such as video artist, physicist, or composer, etc. But they're all just facets of ways of exploring the myriad viewpoints on the same fugitive reality. Increasingly, the senses are connecting and the disciplines are overlapping. Whatever discipline, our ideas are based on our bodies. They are embodied. We see them as things and we grasp and manipulate them. The boundaries are disappearing, and I believe that our fragments of knowledge can be joined up like a big jigsaw, leading to understanding. Information theory and practice has had a lot to do with it, as has digital technology. When everything can be translated into a set of ones or zeros in computation, you can spot the equivalence between categories. It can be felt in the air. Art and science are coming back together. In my own practice as a curious explorer, I've tried to develop an arena of inquiry in the space between various fields, privileging none above another and positively encouraging traffic across the crumbling borders between them. I'm a polymath, artist, designer, scientist, social scientist, and more interested in everything across different domains. I achieve multiple perspectives simultaneously. To do this, I listen and collaborate with individuals and teams from all walks of life, from academia, business, and communities. It's a sort of shared multiple triangulation exercise. The barriers we've built between the disciplines are being breached, dismantled, and dissolved. And I aim to be the first invaluable. With that, I gave them this preview. So this was the show that happened at Home, which is a gallery in Manchester in the UK, from February the 3rd, 2017 till 29th of March. It was a solo show that they commissioned. They had a budget of 65,000, which is not much in scientific terms, but it's quite a lot in terms of the arts. And what I decided to do in the main was to give that budget away. Rock art was one very large art science experience, comprised of large multi-part multimedia installations, including a series of performative evenings. I used live art, poetry, music, painting, digital print, textile design, pedagogy, sculpture design, text-based work, video, digital, sound art, and time-based art. And the effect was an all-enveloping and consuming Gesamtkunstwerk, a total artwork. It involved 36 jobs created for creative industries practitioners, 6 originally recorded musician collaborations, 38 students gained professional experience as apprentices, from 3 art schools: Liverpool John Moores University, Manchester Metropolitan University and Salford University. And it's the first time that those colleges have ever worked together, amazingly. And there were 10,854 visitors, which is 4,500 more than the gallery expected. So I see it as quite a success in that sense. Right, to try and explain it to you, because it's incredibly complicated and it's a short time to do, I think it's best understood as 3 zones. There was a shop, a gallery, and a nightclub. These were all within the show. And these 3 zones created a sequential, experiential journey for the visitor. So zone 1 was the rock shop, and it was a barrier, a border that needed to be navigated into the exhibition gallery. The spatial structure of experience moved the experiencing subject through zone 1, which acted as a sort of birth canal into the gallery, or a reverse birth canal, a river that flowed backward, if you like. The visitor could only enter by navigating through a shocking orgy of saleable ego, on display and for sale too. Multiples of objects, from erasers to plectrums to t-shirts to mugs to books to CDs, etc. Consumer items worthy of a dead artist who had been commercialized by the containing system of the art world. Basically, I saw that Monet had a selection of mugs, and I wanted a selection of mugs too. So I constructed this shop that you had to go through before it completely filled the foyer space, before you could get to the gallery. And all the shop sold was merchandise about me. That's why it's an orgy of ego. And it had this flashing neon sign that I made, which fluctuated between art and shop. So it made no hidden bones about the connection between art and money. Those are the mugs. It even contained virtual items that were already sold out. The show was curated by Sarah Perks, and she said that the only stipulation she had was that I couldn't include any paintings. So as a painter, that was quite a challenge. So I managed to include it with a little model of me as a curator with one of my paintings that was on sale, but unfortunately sold out. The merchandise included things that I'd taken from my notebooks, like this map of everything that I was drawing. And that went on to badges, it went on to t-shirts, along with drawings of fetuses, the development of fetuses, and various slogans like "Make the Self Bigger." Interestingly, looking through my notebooks, Peter, you might recognise this. I found notes from drunken evenings with Peter in a pub in Manchester sometime back in 2009, I think, where he talked about nilpotency, and I was talking about how when I was 13 I translated King Lear into mathematics. We got on like a house on fire because, as we both knew, nothing comes from nothing, to quote Lear. And a picture of Elizabeth Rauscher that I did with when I was attended a Nature's Code meeting with Vanessa there in the foreground. Peter Marcer was there, Peter Rowlands was there, and various other people back in 2008. So these are things I've been thinking about for a while. Zone 2, once you got through the shop, was the gallery, and it had 3 constitutive areas. That's what you were confronted with when you got in. A 15-foot high mirror ball Trojan horse, big punk rock style collage banners, a giant Ben-Day dot cube. Area 1, though, contained a piece called Brainbox. This took the form of an abstracted video projection of me giving a lecture, which was a description of the development of the brain, its evolution, and consequences of that evolution for the way we reason and conceive through primary metaphors based on bodily movement. Alongside this video was another video of cymatic or kymatic vibrating sand, kymatic being the science of waveforms. The juxtaposition superposition of the two video streams presented a new metaphor of moving sand for brainwave activity thought. The dialectic posited the survivalist harmonic calibration orientated construction of the embodied individual in relation to a prefigured environmental context. So the development of the brain is about creating a harmony between the interior and the exterior, between the implicit and the explicit. And there it is on the left, two big screens, vibrating sand, kymatic sand on the left, and an abstracted video of me delivering a lecture on the right. It's not a populist move to start an exhibition with an hour-long lecture on how the brain works, so I think people were pretty sure that they weren't in for like pretty pictures when they entered this one. So on the left is the sand under vibration. This is part of a series. For a number of years, I worked on a set of experiments with vibrating sand, videoed from above. And then on the right, there was this lecture. Right, just for good practice, I thought I'd tell you the stages of the journey we're about to go through. So, obviously, I'm going to try and cover a lot. Last night at about 3 in the morning, I made this 25% the size that it was at 2 o'clock this morning. So hopefully we'll fit it in. But obviously the big subjects, the brain, the plastic brain in the environment, cognitive science, cognitive linguistics, metaphoric transference, primary metaphor, reason, a definition of art, ooh, scary stuff, the wilderness, getting scarier, and then it ends on a sort of optimistic up note at the end. So obviously there's no doubt it'll appear glib. It'll only scale the whole lecture. So I embarked on a long series of experiments to examine the behaviour of waveforms as an interface between art and science, if you like. To investigate the science of kymatics, I built vibrational machines and recorded the movement of excited particles with digital video. Cymatics was first started by Ernst Chladni, who died in 1827, who was vibrating materials to find better resonant materials for building things like violins. And then there was a whole series of experiments you probably know by Dr. Hans Jenny in 1967, where he vibrated various materials, water, oil, Newtonian fluids, etc. And through observation, I extrapolated principles of movement from sand and salt related to the evolution of biological forms. I used these art, maths, biology experiments for a large exhibition, The Creative Spiral, in 2016 in collaboration with a mathematician, John Borenson. And this led to a schools project, which I was very pleased about because nowadays art is excluded from the curriculum in schools, and I found a maths teacher that was able to teach maths through my art. Usually the things on the internet you see about kymatics are looking for these harmonic resonant static points where the sand poured onto the plate, which is vibrated usually by a bow or a motor, forms these symmetrical designs on the right of the screen. These are ones I've just pulled off the internet, but I wasn't interested in that. I built these machines. They're very Heath Robinson. Compared to science budgets of millions, I think I spent 20 English pounds in entirety on my vibrational machine here. It enabled me to change the frequency with the controller on the top right. It was basically a motor on the bottom left fixed under a plane. The plane was the plane on which I sprinkled the sand, and you can see bits of my living room were liberally used to make the machines, and I think the neighbours thought I was sanding a very large floor for a very long time. I vibrated things like water to see how under a water forms basic cellular structures, for example. I observed autopoiesis, where form starts to occur in Newtonian fluid, which is basically corn flour and water, thick and fluid, and starts to form different types of structures. So you can see how natural structures can very easily just be vibration. I was interested not in symmetrical design, but flow. This is sand filmed from above under vibration, negative, so you can see it better. If you get a close-up now, you'll see how violently the sand is all moving, and how every grain of sand appears to be randomly oscillating, but if you zoom out, then it appears as a stable system. So it's all a matter of how far away you are from the vibration, from the design. So it forms systems that are very reminiscent of systems in the body, like heart to liver to stomach, and it kept these in homeostasis, if you like, until you changed the frequency. So it was all about resonant frequency. So I observed feedback loops. I observed systems. I watched this sand move for hours and hours and hours. Nearly as interesting as 2 years I spent watching paint dry previously, but not quite. But you could see synchronization. You could see different size, different mass particles being synchronized around a system in a series of feedback loops. And there were patterns of turbulence which had chaos and anti-chaos inbuilt. All of a sudden you would get a sort of Euclidean form appear in the apparent randomness of the vibration. And all the way through there was biomimesis. You can see things like feet start to appear in the sand structures, or fins start to appear, and they retain stability until you change the frequency. There were also laminate forms. The bigger grains stayed near the bottom, and the smaller grains stayed near the top, even though they were all moving. So there was an organized variety and what seemed like a scripted individuality of life paths in time and space. It's a bit like all those small grains of sand think they're being anarchic and individual, but actually they're following a pattern. A bit like when you go on holiday to Greece and you climb all the way to the top of a mountain to a Greek temple, and then you find that there's the neighbour from next door back home up there already. The large grains go around the circuit in a slower revolution than the smaller grains. The smaller grains are more excited, more energetic, and they may go around 6 times, and the bigger grains go around only 1 time in the same time, but they end up back together again, like the neighbours. It was very aesthetic, it was very beautiful, and there were numerous examples of the golden section, the 0.168 ratio. In fact, they were so beautiful, I made prints from some of them, still prints. This was exhibited in the Krakow Print Triennale. So this was the sort of movement that the sand in a pile would make. It would come out on the diagram on the top left. It would come out at the top of the pile of sand. It would rotate around the pile of sand in an anti-clockwise direction until it got to the bottom, when it would reverse itself and go back, as in the diagram on the top right. It would go back round the pile of sand, back into the middle, round the pile of sand and out again at the top. Excuse me. So these were the sort of diagrams that I was observing, or the patterns I was observing in the sand. I took the maths and the patterns that I'd observed in the sand and I took them into Studio Max in the computer. And basically, the pattern of taking the center of a form through itself. It's like kneading dough. It's like, in mathematics, it's a bit like Smale's horseshoe, where the furthest points are brought to the center and then squashed out again to the edges, and then the edges brought to the center, a sort of very much a baking bread type operation. And then I was twisting it, spinning it on the golden section, so I was spinning it on 0.168. And then I was printing them out in 3D using a printer, 3D printer. And as you can see, they come out as very beautiful and very natural forms. So the research questions there are: is complex beauty based on simple origins? Are complex natural forms the result of a simple set of resonant oscillations? Are complexity and simplicity just a matter of the perspective that we use to view a problem? Are order and chaos part of a natural scalar cycle? Are the academic disciplines really just facets of our perspective anyway? Does thinking of ourselves as artists, mathematician, or any other category limit our ways of seeing? So the content of the lecture next to this in Brainbox was about the growth of the brain in a baby, and about a stage that comes before the differentiation stage into separate senses, when the simultaneous sensomotory conceptual mapping is embedded as neural patterns, maps, or models. So the motor regions of the brain are originally more highly developed than the temporal or occipital cortex. Then the sensory develops, and then the visual. So primary metaphors are physically embedded through actual repetition in a plastic brain that's developing. And the mind is inherently embodied, and thought is mostly unconscious, and abstract concepts are largely metaphorical. So I'm using quite a lot of work of Lakoff and Johnson, and I would recommend them. They said concepts of direct human agency, pushing, pulling, hitting, throwing, lifting, giving, taking, and so on, are among the basic level anchors of our conceptual system in general, and our system of causal concepts in particular. So all concepts are embodied, including basic level concepts, spatial relation concepts, bodily action concepts, aspect, colour, and others. And abstract concepts arise from embodied concepts, and all is grounded in experience. So these are the 26, I think there should be, primary metaphors that in cognitive linguistics as defined by Lakoff and Johnson. So they're saying our concepts are all based on our physical movement. So affection is warmth. When I say movement, I mean physical sensation. Affection is warmth. Important things are big. And you note the capital I there to denote the fact that it's a metaphor. So what it means is happy is the same as up. They're superimposed. Upness implies happiness. Closeness implies intimacy, and intimacy implies closeness. So they're all layered one on top of the other. And concepts in our more developed conceptual frameworks that work, in inverted commas, do not contravene these basic concepts. If you contravene these basic concepts, then your concept is seen to not work. For example, relativity uses the concept that time is spatial dimension. So what's reason? Reason is shaped by the structure of our bodies and brain's neural structure and its functioning in the world. It's evolutionary. It's mostly unconscious. It's literal, but also metaphorical and imaginative. It's emotionally engaged. Real human beings are not conscious of or in control of their reason. Most of their reason is based on prototypes, framings, and metaphors. So things that have gone before and have worked. Framing devices, where we divide something off from something else, and then this layering of one aspect of the world onto the other, as though they're the same. So that's the lecture that's going on the right, and then I'm forming a new metaphor for those brainwaves on the left with the vibrating sand. So the vibrating sand is intended to be a new visual metaphor. So then you move on to area 2, which implicated the visitor in a transsensory bleeding of the borders of the individual. So the individual's been created in area 1, in area 2 it's starting to leak. The boundaries once established are transgressed by sensory crossing inwards and outwards between the implicate and explicate orders. The completion of the individual as a collected set is seen to be impossible through the transient time-bound nature of collecting pulp comic books and the equally transient nature of rocks and stones, momentarily, albeit a longer moment, trapped eddies of sand in a larger flow structure. The visitor is invited to take an active experiential part in the exhibition through multi-sensory transgression of their own border, through borrowing, reading, imbibing the artist as tea, listening to music made by the artist in collaborations. The individual infests or invests other systems, and the other systems infest and invest the individual. The artist infests or invests the visitor. So you move on to that large polka dot Venday dot cube. And inside that cube you find my comic book collection. Every comic that I've ever collected, 2,000 comics, all suffering from the demands of time, all being worn down by the sun. This is a comics library that I created in the gallery. Now this was very much me completely opening myself up. My comics collection is so precious to me, and to just make it public and touchable in this way, with no security, I mean people may have thought there was security, but actually with no security on hand in case people stole them, was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. So I was completely opening myself up. And on the outside, a collection of stones and rocks that I collected from various, you might say, places sacred to me around the world, like the top of Mount Tiedi volcano or a Buddhist temple in Xiamen in China, and a set of texts that went between them, like they were in a museum. The text said things like, speaking with a mouthful of ancient stones, topos hyperuranios, beyond and above heaven. The name for a place that Plato imagined listening to stones rolled by waves at the seashore. There things exist in their perfect forms, the archetypes on which the multiplicity of earthly variations is based. In topos hyperanios, I hear wholeness. Walter Benjamin wrote as a fragment of his Arcades project that any collector would understand Plato's topos hyperanios. I know what he feels. I've been to this imaginary place above and beyond heaven. In the mind of the collector, the set is there and perfect. The comics I have, and also the ones I do not yet have, are there in the perfect set. Each real item contains a hologram of the perfect set. In Storms, in a Welsh caravan, a young prince copied and aspired to be the comic artist Jack King Kirby. That was me. On hot days, I walked rocky beaches with holiday money, 13 miles to corrugated tin shops on beachside campsites to find undiscovered treasures, those rubber-banded scrolls. The collector tries, like King Canute, to hold back time's tide. Crazy Cat would say, King Knut. And maybe so would Elizabeth Rauscher with her physics group. Time flows like magma. Mercury rolls where it will. Energy swells and ebbs, inspires and expires. To hold back time is untenable. The collector knows this impossibility, yet cannot countenance it. Masked, imprisoned escapologist, trapped within the wooden horse of time. To collect is to walk a tightrope tied to nothing. The closer to success, the closer to failure. But the collector keeps to the balancing task. You see, one thing about me, I never give up. I may wobble and even fall, but I get back on the rope every time. The Power Stones are here for one purpose. Did you feel it? Our gift to you. They make you timeless. They make you intangible. A mirror cannot see you. These rocks take you to the here and now, where you are immortal. I always carry a little stone in my pocket to slip space and escape time in an instant. Flame on, flash, atom, vision, silver surf in blackest day, forget me rocks. And then the visitors invited back into the world to go into the skin of the collection and peruse the comics, choose one, check it out with the librarian. I had a librarian sitting in there. Relax in the chair in the reading room that's coming up. Have a drink of me as tea. Listen to some music made by friends playing together and enjoy an unlikely tale of superpowers and secret identities. So the visitor is invited to use every sense, to invade every sense with something. There's the invigilator who served them a cup of tea. The tea I commissioned from another artist who used to be a student of mine, Mike Chavez Dawson. I asked him to make a portrait of me using tea. So it was a one-off specific portrait of me as tea that people could sit and drink. So they were infused, literally infused with me. I made an album of collaborative songs, and the set of lyrics was on the table. People could read the lyrics, listen to the music on headphones. And there were 3 videos. On the left, a vibrating cymatic video of Wordsworth's Daffodils poem. In the middle, sand vibrating over my face and constituting the form of it. And on the right, a video of the Peak District, an environmental video showing how cymatics basically vibrates the environment into the way it is. Because basically the earth vibrates. And the revolution of the motor might be the equivalent of the revolution of the planet in terms of the heat of the sun. The fact that we're on a wobble, a revolutionary wobble, keeps everything in the form that it is. I was interested in why the form of a hand reaching upwards, is more similar to the form of a tree than it's not. Wordsworth's poem, I'm sure you probably all know it, but it is a poem about how the resonance of the landscape actually infects through the wind on the lake, infects the waveforms, infect the flowers on the side of the lake that move with the same breeze, and they do a dance that's continuous as the stars and the Milky Way. So Wordsworth is intuitively, if it wasn't written by his wife, because it does seem rather different to me, to other poems, Wordsworth is intuiting as a macrocosmic and a microcosmic rhyming, which you do see with the golden section, of course. But in this, the important thing is that these waves from the outside world, when he's sitting on his couch, lying on his couch, are replicated through memory on his inner world. So they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And they bring him pleasure because his heart dances with the daffodils. So there you see a resonance transference from the outside world to the inner world. So this is why it's in this transgressive section of the exhibition. See the vibrating single words that put it start to form wave forms under vibration. So, I think that was the world's first climatic poem. And then we move on to area 3, which shows how erosion and osmotic action trigger the letting go of the egoic construct of the individual self in a terrifying, heroic act of uncertainty and risk. And this is manifest as a giant Trojan horse covered in mirror ball mirrors, an out-of-this-world reflective dance floor oddity. From inside, a small voice, a hidden figure, narrates his journeys with instructions into other worlds. The visitor is engaged to accompany him. The strangeness prefigures a difficult return to the world as the visitor, now merged significantly with the artist, is forced to queue beneath looming banners of war and existential threat, waiting for entry into Zone 3, not Area 3, the promised land of Club Big. The return to embodiment of consciousness is a crossing that is not the same as the first crossing out of it. The return from enlightenment is uncomfortable, involving a massive recalibration and reharmonization of the exterior with the interior. This might make more sense when I show you what it was. So you're sitting there listening, having your cup of tea, reading your comics, and there's this giant mirror ball pixelated Trojan horse. So you go from the Ben-Day dots of print media to the pixelation of digital media in the space, from circles there to squares. And it's probably the biggest, most unnoticeable object I've ever made. You can't actually see it when you're in the space because it disappears into a set of small reflections. Inside there's a small voice.
And if you look in the mirror, you can see yourself looking back at you. But if you let your eyes go out of focus, let your mind go blank. You can trick yourself, trick your mind. Is it a trick? Let's say it's a trick. You can trick yourself, trick your mind into seeing the image in the mirror as not you, but another looking out at you. You have to imagine that the world inside the mirror is another world. In fact, you have to imagine that that is the real world, that the doorway you can see behind the figure is one that could be, the figure could go and walk out of there, leaving you standing looking. And the figure could walk into a world that exists beyond that doorway. So the mirror world, you have to convince yourself that the mirror world is the real world and you are standing in the mirror world. Then when you can project your consciousness into the image, into the avatar, into the other on the other, once you can occupy the other side and look back at you, look back at your figure standing there, standing here, then you can, something changes. Your relationship to yourself changes. That mirror experience, it's the reversal of Lacan's mirror phase that happens when babies first see their reflection in the mirror and recognize the reflection as themselves. This is recognizing the reflection as not yourself. And then you can stand outside of yourself. And then it's possible to start to slough off the barnacles that the world has encrusted your body with, encrusted your identity with. You can start to leave the things of the world behind and become something that floats beyond the world. This is the power of the mirror.
So there are very definite instructions on how to transcend your consciousness. Quite clear instructions that I've experimented with, and they work. But when you come back, when you leave the Trojan horse, you're confronted by these sort of punk rock political banners about the dire state of the world. And so from there you see the promised land that was has been advertised previously, the doorway of Club Big, but you can't go directly to Club Big because there's this beautiful barrier that I purchased, which is like the barriers that you get in clubs or in art galleries, which forms the piece of work that's called the anticipation. You have to go back to the beginning of the barrier and queue beneath those large barriers, those large banners that basically have this information on them. This is it's an update of a piece of artwork originally advertising an album by my band, the Three Johns. The original artwork was by John Langford, the guitarist. But as you can see, I'm making a comment on the cyclical nature of history, the cyclical nature of time, where the similarity between our disgruntlement at Ronald Reagan back in the 80s has now been replaced by the election of Donald Trump. And there you can see the cymatically vibrated into place face on the planet of Mars on the top left, Mars being the god of war. So it's an ominous world unconscious pathway that we're treading that you have to wait beneath in order to enter the club. So the club is Zone 3, and it's a reconstructed nightclub, Club Big. It's actually a club I played in when I did miners' benefits for the miners' strike in 1980s. That was in Milan. And the individual effectively dies in the club, and the artist host is now a ghost of his former self. This is a darkened cave of transmutation and celebration of multiplicity and difference. The borders are now known as constructs, the borders of the individual, and those constructs can be disappeared or crafted at will. The individual is felt to be a porous part of a whole, leading to consequent reconstruction as a consciously resonant, unfinished symphony of relatively open, transient flow structures, temporarily manifest and nested within and also containing nests of other resonant, unfinished symphonies of relatively open, transient flow structures. One of the songs that you listened to when you were sitting in the reading room, one of the songs that was on the Quicksilver CD is about how the human body is made up. It's called Cities in the Air, how the human body is made up by thousands and thousands of other organisms, all creating this city that's held in the air, which is the human body. So these transient nested flow systems that are the humans, and this intermingling of them, this interpenetration of the individuals is manifest as an area of collaborative and collective creativity. Free temporal events happen in Club Big every Friday night between 6 and 9. Throughout the show, plus there was a privately commissioned evening for the Arts Council of England's No Boundaries Conference, appropriately termed, in the 8th week. So when you walk in the club during the day, you see very much a dead space with nothing happening. There's a video of me singing. There are these tables that I purposely had to find, these old tables, a collection of rag-bagged chairs and tables. There are posters on the wall. And the posters advertised a series of non-existent artists or alter ego artists. This is the student project that I did with Liverpool John Moores University, Manchester Metropolitan University and Salford University, where I gave the students a project to create, through random processes and then also discussion, create alter ego artists that didn't exist, which they then worked on as groups and created the whole oeuvre of that artist, the work that that artist would have made in their lifetime, depending on what time period they were in, what gender they were, where they lived. And then the students were tasked to make the oeuvre of that artist. So Zane, a student, made some work by Antonio Boring, one of the artists, one of the pseudo-artists. Kirsten Reed was also Antonio Boring and made another piece of work by Antonio. There was an artist, a fake artist called Honey Beautiful, and another one by Natalie Longworth of Honey Beautiful. So the students actually made work that they wouldn't expect to make usually by adopting alternative personas. But if you remember, Club Big wasn't advertised as the dead space when we were back in the shop. Club Big, that big poster on the left, advertised specific nights between 6 and 9. So people had to arrive, and they were told it was free, but they had to get there early because there was a fire limit. This was precisely because I didn't let them in until dead on time, because they were forced to queue as part of the anticipation. It wasn't easy to get into Club Big. There was a woman on the door that wouldn't let you in. So they queued beneath the large banners. Some people queued for 2 hours. It was full every night. When you finally entered under the Club Big sign, the Club Big Band were already playing, aka Cacophony Orchestra. I bought them purple suits so that they were reminiscent of the Merv and the Magic Tones from the Blues Brothers. They were a sort of lounge band. They were there every night. They were the in-between acts band. If you notice, the backdrop has the diagram of the map of everything there is, the map of the universe that you saw back in the shop from my notebooks, and a picture of me as a ghost. I hosted, or my dead self hosted the club, See More Clearly. See More Clearly was basically me with a face pack on, but he did a very good job of doing the sort of the host, the TV style host. Here's a clip of him. You probably recognise me by now. My name's See More Clearly. I am the ghost of John Hyatt. Unfortunately, John died in a sleeping accident 6 weeks ago now. And in his last will and testament, he specified that should he die an untimely demise, then this club should be hosted by his ghost, which is very, very inconvenient to me, as I tell you every week. Because I could be doing things elsewhere, because the afterlife is actually a quite interesting place. However, I wanted to tell you tonight, not a series of jokes, as I normally do, being a dead comedian, but I wanted to tell you the actual events that happen when you pass over. Right, first of all, you feel a slippage, and then it's like that bit in Star Trek where the stars are rushing at you. And you're zooming at top speed through stars, 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 stars. And then all of a sudden, there's a raging yellow sun, and you're heading for that raging yellow sun, and you know when you reach that raging yellow sun, you will be one with everything. You will merge into the entire energy of the universe. You'll be neither big nor small, or hot nor cold. You'll be all potentiality. But just to the left, I'm telling you this for when it happens, just to the left of that raging yellow sun, there's a blue sun. And if you choose the blue sun, then you get to come back, because you feel you haven't finished something. So that's what happens. Okay, our first act. So Seymour was the first comedian, dead or alive, to ever make a joke out of the information in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And he also, of course, was speaking from personal experience. So the club was packed. There was all sorts of people. People came from all over. They're on the front row. You've got Dennis and Lois, who are internationally renowned. They're from They came from New York. They collect bands. They collected the Ramones. They collected my band, the Three Johns. They're the world's greatest music fans. And if they collect a band, they attend every gig. There's now a movie about Dennis and Lois that's out, appropriately called Dennis and Lois, quite a moving movie. So there was rock and roll. There's John Langford on stage. There was dance. That's a friend called Yandas, now a friend. I mean, what I did was I selected people. I did internet searches, and I selected people that I thought were doing the most interesting things that were going about at the time, and I put them together. It was very much intentionally put together as a space of transgression of boundaries, a space of intergenerational, interracial, interdisciplinary activity. So as well as rock and roll, there was a sacred women's voice choir in a collaboration with an artist called Nadia Badji. What I did was I worked with the artists to create new works in the period before the show, but gave them very much a free rein. There were video works. This one's by Joe Pearson. And there were works by young international artists. This one's an Indian video maker, poet, actor. playwright called Rathish Krishna. And this one's somebody that we all know. This is Andrew Crompton, member of ANPA, who did a lecture on shirts, new shirts, and how they relate to the sacrifice of the Lindau man. Fantastic act. There were noise bands that made improvised noise. And then on the golden section evening, the 0.618, I think I said 0.168. I've got numerical dyslexia. 0.618, the golden section. What people didn't know was that I'd constructed the club. It was a circular club. I constructed it in the gallery, but I'd constructed it with the walls on wheels so they could open. But I never told anybody this until this particular night, when I Seymour clearly got the audience to chant, "Bring in the horse, bring in the horse, bring in the horse, bring in the horse." And what they didn't know, because they were facing the stage, behind them the walls were opening, and invigilators from the gallery were pushing in the giant mirrorball Trojan horse, because I'd also built that on wheels that had never been revealed until that moment. And the horse came in, and the horse was constructed big enough to house 5 people. And out of the horse appeared King Nobody and his Theatre of Nothing. And this is an artist called Emrys Morgan that I brought out of his retirement as a performance artist. He hadn't performed for 15 years, to do this absolutely amazing performance about struggling with materiality. We've got this table with 2 big wheels and 2 little wheels that would only go round in a circle. He got entangled in bandages. He was very much a metaphor for how in the current political situation we're actually all King Nobody. And then on the final night, an amazing thing happened with the help of Ruby Tingle there on the left, and Simon Woolham dressed as the Frog Prince. An amazing transmutation occurred where Seymour clearly resurrected as John Hyatt, so actually returned to the world during the performance at Club Big, which basically just meant me washing the face pack off my face in a sort of ceremony. So what Club Big's about is very much about things that are running through the show. If you've got me and a known world 1 on the left, and then you as a known world 2 on the right, with your body in the middle and a circumference of knowledge, when those knowledges start to merge, you get a merger of 1 with 2 and also of 2 with 1. And then should they merge completely, which would happen maybe in the Tempest between Ferdinand and Miranda, if you think back to the talk I did last year, where they exchange eyes with each other because they're in love, the me, you, world 1 and 2 and world 2 and 1 would merge, and then that would move off separately to meet unknown world 3s. These are diagrams from those notebooks. So, using the traditional notion of the artist as a paradigm of individualism, and the individual as a momentary eddy of information retention, via the superposition of the metaphor of vibrating sand particles for how information moves, forms and recombines the research, explored the questions: what is required to be a member of global society in the emergent and rapidly evolving 21st century, and how has the role changed? Rock Art asked, are there new dampened ego ways of working and collaborating based upon the paradigm of music as experiential, shared, social co-creation of resonant, vibrating information? The findings are that a destruction of ego and a new paradigm of collective, collaborative creativity are required for the future of the planet. The show looks back and forwards in time, back to cave painting even, hence the name rock art. When we enter the darkness of Club Big, we're entering the cave. Think of Plato's cave. Think of the caves of tribes, where initiation of transformation is the order of the day. And the initiate, in order to transcend, transform, mutate, gain enlightenment, knowledge, and understanding, must actually die a false death and must surrender all ego and trust to surrender all control to the inevitable vibrating field of information. Meditation aims for experience of this root state, the calm spot where all energy and potential resides. It's the goal of spiritual practice. In his lyrical ballads, Wordsworth called it a spot of time, when one sees into the life of things. So a punctuation in time. In the marvellously titled Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey, on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13th, 1798, a spot of time, he wrote of a moment in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. So ultimately, rock art is a show about stepping outside of our frameworks of reason and discarding the safety net of our embodied metaphorical guesswork through a process of surrender and trust. Surrender of the show to others, surrender of identity, surrender of ego, surrender of boundaries, surrender of conceptual models, surrender of control. And this enables the stepping out, which is also a stepping in, or, to use a primary metaphor of up is good, a stepping above. From above, you can see the connections and our knowledges become wisdom. To do this, trust in love, trust in community, trust in others, and trust in chaos is a necessity. Einstein said, or perhaps it was his wife, and it's been suppressed, in Ideas and Opinions, a human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe. A part limited in time and space, he experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. And that's the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Okay, if you stop sharing your screen, and I know there are going to be loads of questions because they've already started on the chat.
Stop share.
Okay.
Oh, there's a lot of chat.
Yes, there's been a lot of chat. A lot of it has been about what are concepts, what's consciousness, what's awareness, and it's almost as if there's kind of it's kind of been a sort of accompanying dynamic to your presentation, really. But anyway, who's got a proper question? Okay, Christine.
Well, I've just got some sort of rather boring academic themes to pull out, because obviously it's a very total, invigorating subject that doesn't really need an academic approach, but that's all I've got to offer. So first of all, I'm saying I have sort of prejudiced myself in favor of minimalism, and I've realized that this is the very opposite. This is an art of the accumulative. And I was thinking that, well, Wagner, for example, is supposed to have looked into total art form. And in a way, the sort of paradox there, I think, that if you lose too much specificity, you lose something. I'm not saying that this isn't a wonderful accumulative art form, but I'm making a plea for, in the interdisciplinary too, not losing the specific and the minimalist. And funnily enough, I was listening to a talk about autism this morning on the radio, and I realized that autism is almost like a surfeit of sensory input. And I was wondering there, that relates to this terror, I think, that was referred to, John referred to, coming out of the, almost like out of the other world into the terror of random existence, that they need to sort of minimalize again and push things out. And the other, just one other point here, when you mentioned the language, the mirror stage, which is Lacan, obviously, when the child enters the mirror stage and recognizes its own image, it's interesting that that coincides with the coming of language. So at the moment that the child forms sort of identity recognition, also got this great lack, this abyss, this performative abyss between, but that lack becomes what Lacan calls the condition of our subjectivity. In other words, our creativity is formed in lack. So I appreciated the way that this talk addressed that. And the only last thing I would think out of so many is context, frame, and so on, as a way of limiting the multiplicity, the surfeit. I mean, we're all potentially autistic in that sense, that we've got to minimalize a surfeit of things. Well, I should probably stop there at this point. I'd be interested to hear. And also Chladni patterns in Roslin Chapel. I just want to add that in because John Amson worked on a bit on the Chladni patterns in the stone of Roslin Chapel, which are corresponding to music. And so I just throw that in to see what, if that would lead anywhere. But thank you very much. And I think it was Wordsworth's sister that wrote his poems, by the way, not his wife.
Yeah, you're correct. Well, obviously I was doing it very quick for a highly complex set of work, so it may have seemed that the multiplicity was overwhelming. But what I was trying to say in the cymatic metaphor is that simplicity and complexity are the same thing, and it's just a matter of how far away you are from it. So that the rapidly vibrating small grains of sand, if you zoom out, become large, fairly static, slowly moving formal shapes. And it's very much the same with the experience with the enlightenment stroke transcendental experience of the reverse Lacan mirror phase that I was talking about with the Trojan horse. So I'm talking about not recognizing the mirror image as yourself, and letting go of the straitjacket of language. And when you do that, you become aware that everything is connected and it's all one whole. And that's where, by letting go of the rationalism, and by letting go of the language, and by letting go of the frameworks, you actually experience the universe as one whole. So you go through the multiplicity, you zoom out and above the multiplicity, and then you see a very simple one structure. So that's what I was trying. That was what I was trying to do. So you maybe noticed the multiplicity too much because I did maybe a misemphasis in the way I described it.
No, I appreciate that. I think the intensification of the self in order to become impersonal is a very important sort of aesthetic. And I think of Mallarmé again, inevitably, who said, I used to once be Stéphane Mallarmé, and that self died, and the universe speaks through the loss where I was, the hole where I once was. So I can appreciate that kind of aesthetic, and it does need intensification of the self in order to paradoxically abandon the ego. But I still think that there's an individual subjectivity as the frame. I mean, you know how Derrida uses the word, is it paragon or paragon, meaning that the things outside the frame are contained within. I just feel that worried that even with that dissolution aesthetic that we've just spoken of, abandoning the ego, it's different abandoning the ego from abandoning the precise limitations that are precious to the self, the boundaries. And the boundaries are missing sometimes in autism, which is terrifying. So I'm just trying to deal with that.
Yeah, but
the limit
and
the infinite are together. You know.
Yeah, I'm not talking about autism. No, I'm talking about a conscious reconstruction of the limit, whereas previously the limit was unconscious. So I'm talking about you have to rebuild the limits. You can't function without the limits in a world where Donald Trump's being elected. But you consciously construct new limits as a creator.
Okay, any other questions?
Cool.
Peter, Marcia. You have to unmute Peter.
Unmute. You're on mute, Peter.
Yeah, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, okay.
There we go.
For some reason it's, no, I'd just like to thank John for use of what I might say is the use of his emotional intelligence, which clearly we all must have, but which is a driving, seems to be a driving force in his consciousness to reach the kind of conclusions he has, which I fully concur with. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Any other contributions, questions? Divyaman.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was really nice to see this work since the last year you had shared the painting and really talked about that relationship. I just wanted to share, I've been reading Francisco Varela's Principles of Biological Autonomy. And in chapter 2, I found a really nice thing that I wanted to share with the group. He was talking about perturbing events, you know, and he said that if the independent perturbing events are regular in their nature and occurrence, an autopoietic machine can in fact be integrated into a larger system as a component allopoietic machine without any alteration in its autopoietic organization. And I thought that that was kind of, it reminded me of the Chladni experiments and the regular perturbations of the transducer or the thing that you were using on the laminate surface to vibrate it. And I thought that was such a nice way that he had written that, like, you know, of the relationship between living and boundary, and how that the integration of auto and allo. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, that was just a brief thing I wanted to share about it. I was reminded of that
Yeah, yeah.
sentence. Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, obviously, I could have talked for an hour just about the vibrating sand, or I could have talked for an hour about any part of it, but I did try to give you the whole thing, which maybe was a bit overfacing. But the vibrating sand was really interesting because as you increase the frequency, as you as the hertz rise, you would think the sand would get more and more active and just shoot off the sides of the plate, but it doesn't. In actual fact, what it does is as you go through the frequency, the sand expands, and then it's still going up and it contracts, and then it's still going up and it expands and it contracts, and there's just some beautiful rhyme thoughts there for me about growth and about maybe things like redshift. You know, just because the universe is expanding doesn't mean it's not going to just breathe.
Yeah.
And there's some beautiful things in watching sand move. It's very poetic. It's on the board. It's like music. It's on the border between art and science.
Yeah.
Because most of the Chladni experiments we see are on square or rectangular plates. Some of them we see in circular.
Yeah.
So I was curious if you had tried it on different shapes, or whether the boundary of the laminate surface really determined what pattern, what
Yeah.
the eventual pattern
I mean,
was.
I tried it with lots of materials, including water and oil, and on lots of surfaces, on lots of shapes. I did a whole. Unfortunately, I've lost all the videos because my hard disk fell onto the floor. So I've got hours and hours of videos that I've lost. But I wasn't interested in those harmonic points. I wasn't interested in achieving those symmetries. I think the symmetries are rather boring, and what I was actually interested in is the transport between the symmetries. So I wasn't interested in homeostasis. I was interested in the transport between, very much in the way I think we're witnessing the transport between, through heating up the planet, we're witnessing the transport between two weather systems, and we're probably in the chaotic middle of a journey between an old stable weather system and a new one that we haven't yet attained. And in that transport, there's going to be extreme violence, like we saw with the vibrating sand. The whole formal structure of the weather is going to shift, and a lot of people are going to get killed in the process. These things have macrocosmic. It's not just me playing with a pile of sand. They have macrocosmic consequences. As soon as you put more energy into the system, then it changes to a new strange attractor and a new pattern.
Okay.
But if I could just say that in Roslin Chapel roof, it is that stone, to come back to what you were saying that about stone, that it's the music is coded in the, you know, they're playing the Chladni patterns that are coded into the stone of Roslin Chapel roof. And when I was looking at that a little bit, and I found a book about the way that stone, like in the old cathedrals or and so on, can act as a sort of tape recorder because of the silicon or something, a lattice work. I don't know enough, I couldn't possibly say, but they think that the stone walls of the cathedrals are holding the voices of all the monks and the singing, the resonance, because it acts like a tape recorder. Is that nonsense, or do you see anything in that it's something to do with the resonance and the silicon?
Well, I imagine all sounds would have to continue to resonate somewhere. It diminishes with distance, but does it ever disappear? I don't know. I mean, there are theories that, you know, you could theoretically transcribe, as in a record, you could transcribe sound into a clay pot with a chicken feather. So you could, you know, there's no reason why it's not like that.
Yes.
It's not something that I would say I was an expert on, but they are, I think, they are describing the harmonious nature of the universe. Basically, the universe is one and it's in harmony, but what we're experiencing is broken symmetry. So we're living through broken symmetry, hoping to reattain harmony. It would actually be a very awful thing, because it would just be completely static. It would be dead.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The interesting thing about life, I think, is that it's a broken symmetry, and it's a transport between harmonies rather than the harmonies themselves.
And as someone said yesterday, you can't change your mind when you're dead. You know?
Well, I did. But it's why I'm a punk rock singer rather than a chorister, I think.
Okay. John Torday.
John, thank you. I really like the holistic approach. I do think we make a systematic error by not transcending the present and understanding how the present relates to the history of organic life. But what I wanted to say was that, just to relate what I was trying to say in my lecture about, but I agree about the vibrations. The vibrations in life, at least in vertebrate life, are those that are caused by lipids immersed in water, lipids coming from pulsars. We know that they derive from pulsars, so it's a natural phenomenon. And those lipids orient themselves vertically to the surface of the water, and they act like antennae. So that's how that vibratory mechanism occurs. And so in respect to your sand model, I think the problem is we have been in sync with your sand model up until this juncture, when we started to burn fossil fuels, and now we've dissociated ourselves from the natural relationship between life and the inanimate aspects of the environment we live in. But if you care to comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I talked about, I mean, I could have talked longer about the brain and the growth of the brain in the embryo. But obviously we've evolved to a point where we had a harmonic relationship as a sort of natural creature with the natural world. But I'm one of these people of the mind that we still are natural, and even the things that we make are natural. And the question is how we integrate those harmoniously with the other structures. The Industrial Revolution created a lot of evils, but they did it for good intention. I mean, it was an age of wonder, and they were trying to do something marvelous, but it just unfortunately has turned out rather tragic. But it's now our job to harness the disharmonies, if you like, and bring them back into tune. So I completely agree. I'm not an expert in your field, but I did very much enjoy your talk. But in my rambling, or what's the word, daydreaming mind, if you like, previously, I thought, from looking at things like Celtic myths, where the source of life starts at the source of streams.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the pool at the source of the Shannon, for example, the goddess, the Shannon. That there's always a pine tree, and maybe that the cellular wall was formed from the oil from pine trees in turbulent water, where the turbulence creates a sufficiently static flow, so like the eye on Jupiter, so that the flow creates a static spiral, if you like, for sufficiently long enough. You would get autopoiesis. So that was my sort of surmising about the origins of life.
But
I'll
I
throw
think that
that in.
sorry, I just feel that with the mention of Celtic there, I'm not so keen on this art is good. I mean, there's a tree of life, its roots go down. My view, verticality is always connected with force, you know, transcendentalism, metaphysics. It's verticality where, to me, true value and values in the future lies. I am a humanist, but not in the sense of the old humanism, which is based on verticality and idealisms and Platonic. I mean, Plato has wonderful things to say, but it's mainly, to me, the horizontal level that I'm interested in. So when you said that ARP is good, did you mean that that is a sort of conventional dead metaphor that is in language, or that you yourself felt that it was an instinct?
It was taken from the work of Lakoff and Johnson, where they did an analysis of language to discover those 26 primary metaphors. So it's a dead cliche, if you like. It's an uninvigorated metaphor. Yes. I personally agree with you that down is probably good, or they're equal, and that in the underworld, that's where things rot, that's where things decay, that's where things reconstitute into their basic components.
Or not binary, up or down. Not that up and down is the binary, and
So it wasn't.
John, in listening.
But sorry.
So my bias construed our existence as material, when in fact we are energy. And once you take that perspective, then the material aspects become trivial. It's all about and you mentioned that in your talk too, the energy flows. Yeah. But I'm just suggesting that sort of heretic idea that we assume we're material because that's what we experience. But once you factor out the material, all that's left is the energy flows.
Yeah, well, it feels to me like we're sort of, as life, if you like, we're trying to create constructions that can momentarily, or for as long as we can maintain, can capture order, and that we're always in danger of entropy. So for me, it's energy put towards the creation of order is what we're continually trying to do, and that's the fugitive thing that we lose. But when I say life, I'm including plants and animals and rocks, stones. So in a broad sense of inclusion, there's different ways of trying to capture the energy in a continuing flow system in which we exist. Yeah. But we're open systems, aren't we? We're only temporarily holding that order.
So how would you like to rephrase Descartes' cogito, not I think that what is it? I think therefore I am. But would you
Well, that's
sort
I
of?
agree with it.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think thinking's got anything to do with it. If you like.
Well, I think you are formulating it implicitly by everything you've contributed.
Yeah, yeah. I just haven't got the nice, neat way of saying it, but yeah.
Can I ask a musically related question?
Yeah,
There's
please
a
do.
there's a music theorist called Vincent Dandy, who was also a composer. He had a fascinating theory about harmony and harmonic movement and its relation to physiology. And basically, he said that when you go sharp, so if I start in C major, if I go sharp to, so I'm now in E major, F sharp major, he argued that basically there's a sort of tightening of the stomach muscles. And so that's the up, in a sense. And then when you go flat, it's a release. So that's coming back down again, and obviously we've got flat notes rather than sharp notes.
Yeah.
And there's something there's something about this which our logic doesn't capture.
Yeah. Well, it vibrates with our emotional centers, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's why. I mean, what I was I going to say? No, it's gone, Mark. I've got an answer for you, but it's gone. I think it's interesting. I think that's very interesting. And I'm sure it's probably true.
Well, you feel it. And
yeah.
Music works on this principle. Certainly harmony works. It works with our bodies. The reason why we it's often
I mean,
we ask, sorry.
What I was doing when I was a kid, when I was translating King Lear into maths, what I was looking at really in terms of what John Tordy was talking about, what I was looking at was how King Lear works as an energy flow. So I was adding positive charges where expectation was being generated in the viewer, in the attender of the play. And then when the expectation was dissipated, I was making that negative charges. So I was creating an energy form out of King Lear, mainly encouraged by the nothing comes from nothing idea. And basically a work of art takes a starting point, moves through a series of energy hills, shapes, and then returns, if it's satisfying, returns to the starting point.
Yes.
And I think that's true of music. I think it's true of syntax. I think it's true of most time-based art forms. And it's probably true in terms of still paintings, in terms of harmonic resonance of colour to colour.
I think Dino Bozzetti again was working on the fact that a text always takes, in his view, the shape of a Möbius strip, which is related to what you were saying there. That's what he's looking into, I think. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Mark, to repeat myself, I mean, we live in the Bohm's explicate. It did not exist until life began. And so what you're talking about with regard to music or John art, aesthetics, it's all the relationship between our physiology and the physical world. So of course, so if it's dissonant, it's not satisfying to us, we reject it, right?
I don't know whether we reject it. I think.
Can't hear you, Mark.
Sorry. My internet's not very good today. I'm not sure we reject it. I think it becomes part of the process, and somehow we have to integrate it. So if you have a dissonance, you have to resolve it. So the dissonance is part of the process. We're not rejecting it.
Dissonance doesn't have to be dissonance with respect to consonants. It can't just be nuance. That won't
It
work.
has to
In
though,
terms of,
like, because then you have the
in terms
tuning
of the history,
systems of the European Eurocentric tuning for a while, and that's very conventional and sort of indoctrinated.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you have different cultural musics that totally don't are not, you know, pitches aren't corresponding in that you know, nice harmonic way that for some of us sound harmonic, but
Yeah.
other people might want to stab their eye out because it's like, oh, why is this sounding so weird?
yeah.
So
I
it
think
gets
the
tricky
history
with
of music
hearing.
has been the history of music is also the history of noise, and I think there's been a constant inclusion of noise into the category of music. So it's music in terms of contemporary music and like music concrete and things like that. The inclusion of noise has expanded the concept of music. But there's also, in terms of those Chladni plates and the Western musical tuning that was adopted in America in 1938 because of the piano, to get constant tuning for the piano. The hand width of the piano keys has dictated the hertz resonance of the scale, so that the A in Western music is different to the A that would be used in Celtic fiddle music, where they do stack up the harmonic resonances exactly on top of each other. But when we're listening to all Western music, it's slightly dissonant, and a lot of people think that that is actually bad for our health. That there's, I mean, when I worked in art with Arts for Health in Manchester, when I was director of Myriad in Manchester, the research institute there, we had Arts for Health, and we worked with a group that were investigating health and music. And in the oldest hospital in Syria, the things that they found in the clay tablets there were the accounts, and the bills were from musicians that they hired in the hospital every week to play to the patients. Those musicians were playing solfeggio music where the harmonics stacked up properly. So there's probably a relationship between reverberation and health, I would think.
Yeah.
I wonder if the correspondent, the way we think about music as sound is probably misleading. It seems that we're dealing with a kind of a language of emotion, a language of feeling, rather than something that's specifically tied to sound itself, or even a particular form. I mean, that was Suzanne Langer's argument. If you know her Philosophy in a New Key, where she articulated.
Yeah. I mean, there are harmonics outside of the human range of hearing that we know affect us physically, like very bass sounds. It can be very visceral.
I was really curious about the experiment with your students, where you asked them to create an artist and make a work that this artist would have made, or it just sounded really interesting because it brought up questions of you know, the process that we go through when we're making a work, and now, you know, creating a new fictional artist, and then through this artist creating a new work. It sounded kind of interesting, or
Yeah.
like the questions of who really made this work then, you know, or that kind of. So I want to hear a little more about that, if you.
if you get stuck, it's a great idea to create an alter ego artist. So I am, for example, the printmaker's printmaker, Sir Stuart Farquhar, who's had various exhibitions of printmaking. I am Jerry Windrim, who's an Irish storytelling installation artist who's also had exhibitions. And it's really liberating. It really gets you out of any habits and puts yourself in perspective. And with the students, what I did was got them all to write down. I can send you, if you're interested, the instructions that I gave them. But it's based on random selection of environment and random selection of character traits and random selection of name, and then they're sent away with those coordinates, if you like, that contextual framework, and they decide what sort of art that sort of person would have made, and what they might have made when they were young, and what they might have made when they were old, and then they're asked to make the entire oeuvre of that artist. I've got some. I mean, there's some fantastic work. I only showed you, obviously, because of time, the very briefest selection. But some of the work was probably miles better than the work that they were making themselves, and then that throws up a hell of a lot of questions for the student. You know.
I'd like to say there that to do with, do you think that what we're aiming at in art really is impersonality? There's an expression, you know, that the novel writes itself, and I always say, well, put it in the wardrobe and come back and see if it has. But I think I know what that means. It's the same in this Tao of Physics book that was mentioned, talking about Zen, where the artist, the craftsman shooting a bow is a famous example where he has to learn exactly how to shape the bow and to hold it and so on. But eventually it's as if it fires itself. And I think that this impersonality, where something happens almost like through us, we are doing it, and maybe the unconscious is involved, but it's almost as if it's gone into an impersonal region where we feel that something is coming back to us through it that we couldn't have got to without the medium. It's that interplay.
It's that moment where, I mean, I call it being in the zone.
Yes.
Where you, what I'm saying is that is losing the edge of yourself. That is when you, through intense concentration on something, and it can be a habitual act. I mean, I think that's why monks and people like that do a lot of cleaning and sweeping. It's to do with disengaging the mind. So if you can disengage it does seem as though the work makes itself. I agree, and it does bend. And in terms of music, I think you can, certainly in the perception of the listener in a gig, you can actually make the architecture bend.
Yes.
Can't hear you, Mark, if you speak.
Sorry. I was going to say there's a lot of redundancy involved in the practices, but spiritual practices. If you get to the end of any piece of music, you usually find lots and lots of repetition, lots of, you know, things settle down for some reason. So there's a deeper dynamics, I think, behind this stuff.
Well, there's a lot of redundancy in nature.
Yes.
Nature wouldn't be nature if it didn't have lots of redundancy. It has lots of other options on the table in case the environment changes and something doesn't work. It's like a sunflower will go for the one big sunflower head, but if the weather's not right, it'll generate 5 smaller ones. It has plan B always in mind.
Mark, what did you mean actually when you said music aspires to silence? Because I find that very suggestive. I keep thinking it. I wondered how you had intended that.
Well, I mean, you can start with Victor Borge. You know, his famous thing about, you know, the last chords of pieces, and it's the last chords are really interesting because
Oh yeah.
you know it's the last chord, except a lot of composers are very good at pretending that it wasn't the last chord and actually there's another one. I don't know if I'll have to put it on the chat. Dudley Moore playing Colonel Bogey in the style of Beethoven is a classic example of a last chord. But you know, basically he plays with this whole thing of we are going to stop, but not just yet.
It's always a good idea to start the next artwork before you finish the last one, I find.
But it's also because of a swan song, isn't it? That we're always on the edge of dying, of
Yes.
going. And so there's an emotion about the last chord of a piece of music
Yeah.
that always makes you want to cling on to it.
Yes. And I wonder, you know, one of the things I've asked myself is obviously we like pieces.
Shows you.
We like pieces to be well finished. So we like things to, you know, to know that we've got to the end and that's the end. But what if it did just finish in the middle? What if it just didn't stop?
Sorry, it's been technologically interfered with.
I know this. It's yes. I was just saying, what if music just stops in the middle?
John, do you want to ask something while Mark's?
Yeah, I wanted to. Tina said something the other day that sort of stuck in my mind. She was saying that modern art tends to fragment us, and I think it's the opposite. I think art teaches us how to see, in the same sense that music teaches us how to hear. So we're really creating art forms that teach us how to understand the external environment. That's why it's aesthetically okay to do that sort of thing, in my opinion.
I don't think it fragments us, but it uses fragmentation to stimulate our ordering.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'll never look at a haystack the same after seeing a Monet haystack, for example. He's trained me how to look at a haystack, or, you know, or Warhol's soup cans. I'll never eat a can of tomato soup the same way again after seeing one of those.
Well, that's my little hand-drawn circles diagram. Once Monet's haystacks have entered your lattice of knowledge, and it becomes part of your lattice of knowledge, and the entire lattice has to shift because it's entered. I mean, there were experiments long ago with monkeys where they placed I don't know who did it, placed electrodes on the exposed brain of a monkey that knew the smell of banana, and they mapped the electrical impulses for the smell of banana, and it was a picture of the smell of banana. Then they exposed him to the smell of banana again, and it was the same picture for the smell of banana. Then they exposed him to the smell of sawdust, which he'd never smelt before, and he got a different map. And then they exposed him again to banana and got a new, different map for banana, because the monkey knew sawdust now. So our frameworks are never rigid, they're always continually evolving, and depending on the new things that we're absorbing.
But doesn't the material has to be presented in a physiologically relevant way? I don't think you could compose a tomato soup can composition and music, or vice versa, or you know, haystacks, you know, musically. It doesn't work. It's those are visual things as opposed to other things which are auditory. So it has to be presented in a physiologically relevant way in order to do what you're saying, right?
Yeah. But it would enter your field of knowledge and would change the rest of the field. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, I agree. There's-
I think we
nothing
mustn't
on-
underestimate mimesis is not mentioned much, but aren't we deeply mimetic animals as well as intertextual animals? We're traversed by all the voices and the other things that we are made of, but basically we're imitative.
Absolutely.
And so mimetic simulation is a very important concept, isn't it, with
Yeah.
how we, well, I won't go into it, but it seems very important.
Well, I had a PhD student who did an analysis of MA artist students and how they learned. And basically they all learned through copying.
Yes, yeah.
I think that the mimetic comes, in my opinion, it comes from that embryological principle of endogenization of factors in the environment. We are one and the same as our environment, literally, because of that process. And so that's where the mimesis, I think, comes from. It has to be relevant to our physiologic composition, which derives from the physical.
Yeah.
And the
I mean,
poetic,
there's a sense where beauty is a recognition of the form of our own brains outside in the environment, I think.
Right, folks, we could sit here all night and talk about this,
that's true.
but we're not going to do that. We are going to stop. So, and no
Have
doubt
the
this.
physicists got any questions? They're very quiet
No,
tonight.
no, that was really.
You're an artist. Thank you, though, Andrew.
That was
You're the
deeply,
truth.
I'm deeply interested in metaphor and Lakoff and Johnson. And I was,
One of their books, though, it's the same book
yes,
over
it
and
is.
over again.
It is. But it's very striking.
Almost.
No, it's another one. It's another one.
Yeah. I very much enjoy your concerts.
Thank you very
Andrew.
much.
In Club Big.
Something you
Thank
haven't
for
mentioned is I'm
performing.
sure that what you did was influenced by a near-death experience to do with the vanishing
Yeah.
of John Hyatt and what that brought to you.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's another story, I think.
But is,
Yeah.
I think that add to the poignancy of what you did. It was just amazing.
I did nearly die from throat cancer.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a new voice that I was using in Club Big because my old one had disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Is this
Yeah.
John Hyatt's story or is this, are you
Yeah,
talking
me.
about, oh, you're talking about you, okay. I
Yeah,
was wondering, wow, that's,
5 years ago I had throat cancer. But
it's good now or what?
yeah, it's fine. Yeah, not bad, especially since lockdown. I'm doing yoga and things. I'm healthier now than I ever was, I think.
That's good.
Prior to that, I was still getting neck cramps and like Velcro throat, as I call it, where the two sides stick together. But my chin has rebuilt itself.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, the dead me see more clearly. He's
Yes.
he actually is the dead me. He was the dead me.
And they say Homer didn't write the Odyssey. It was someone very like him.
Someone else with the same name. Yes.
I must show you. I'll just hang on a minute there.
Wow.
It's called.
His first public engagement. This is Diddy Seymour,
Nice.
who's the puppet version of Seymour Clearly. With Seymour Clearly on stage, so I'm preparing him for his first public performance. This is one of my papier-mâché sculptures that I've been making during lockdown.
And you.
So you're at ANPA.
Yeah, it's the first performance already.
We'll book him in for
We
next
see.
year.
Yes.
Okay, I think we should probably stop. But John, thank you ever so much. It's been a wonderful, a tour de force, really, and such a thought-provoking session. And the chat is mind-blowing. I mean, it's been an amazing accompaniment to what you've
I
done.
haven't read it yet. I'm looking
No,
forward to
yes,
that.
I'll send it around, but it's been fantastic. So thank you ever so much. Doug, I know, has gone, but he's getting ready, no doubt, to talk to us tomorrow about something. I can't even remember what he's talking about, but I'm sure it'll be great. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.